Hello, this is Dr. Muriel Rand from New Jersey City University, and this video is on balanced literacy instructional methods. This slide shows the instructional context for reading, and it goes along with the gradual release of responsibility, which I'm going to go over in a minute. You can see that there are different components of literacy instruction in the early years. There's usually a read aloud, there's time for shared reading, time for guided reading, time for literacy centers, and time for independent reading and conferences. We're going to go through each one of those, but first let's take a look at the gradual release of responsibility model. Here we can see that there's three different levels of support when we're teaching literacy. The first is I do, where we model it for our students. And then the next level is the we do, where we do it together with our students. And then finally, it's the you do, where we send them off to be independent. And the truth is we learn almost everything this way. Think about how you might learn to cook. First, you watch your mom cook, and then maybe you help your mom with the cooking and you do it together. And then eventually you're on your own. You might call up mom and say, hey, how did you do this? And get a little bit of support, but you're independent and doing it on your own. So reading instruction is the same way. We have the I do, which is, for example, shared reading or read alouds, which are above the student's reading level because we're doing it. So we're going to show them this higher level. And then we're going to do it together. That would be the guided reading time, and that's on the child's instructional level. And then the you do, which is when we send the kids off to practice reading on their own, and the book they're reading should be at their independent level. So again, I want to point out a couple of things here. First, we model, then we do it with the students, and then they do it on their own. So we have different types of time periods during the day when we do this. The I do is usually called shared reading or read aloud. And again, the text that we're reading, the book that we're reading, is going to be above the student's reading level. In guided reading, the text is going to be at what we call their instructional level, which is just barely above what they can do on their own, but we want to push them a little bit, and we're going to be there to help them. And then the independent reading level is right at their level, which they can do comfortably on their own without any help. Okay, now let's look at the different parts of the day. Here are the components of balanced literacy: the interactive read aloud on the left, the shared reading, guided reading, literacy centers, and independent reading and writing. The instructional type you can see in the interactive read aloud is usually whole group. It could be small group, either one. Shared reading could be whole group or small group. Guided reading is always in small group. Literacy centers are always independent or small group. And independent reading and writing is obviously independent. The students might be doing it with a partner, but the teacher is not helping them. So you can see in the gradual release model, the interactive read aloud is the I do, the shared reading, the I do and we do, because we model it and we do it with them. The guided reading is a we do, the literacy centers are you do, and the independent reading and writing is a you do. So let's take a look at each one of these. The interactive read aloud is just your story reading period, or you might be reading informational text. The teacher reads the book aloud and the students only listen. They don't even have a copy of the text. They might look at the pictures. You are either holding the book out for them or you're doing it online and showing them the pictures. The text is above the grade level of the students because we're modeling higher level thinking and reading. And the focus here is on comprehension rather than decoding. There's no decoding because we're doing the decoding. The students are just listening. So this is an important time to get kids to focus on comprehension. So we might focus on things like text structure, vocabulary, background knowledge, and just the use of sophisticated language such as metaphors or similes or onomatopoeia. And it's an interactive read aloud because the teacher's going to stop to engage the students. We might stop and have them do a turn and talk about predictions or noticing details or acting out vocabulary words. So it's interactive. It's not just a boring listening to the teacher, but we're going to read, stop, and get them engaged in some way. The next is shared reading. This is what's usually done with a big book on an easel, or again, it could be done online with you showing the pictures and the text. The difference between this and the read aloud is that the text should be large enough that the students can read the words. So the teacher's going to read the book. and the students will chime in on the repeated phrases. And again, the big books are used so that the children can actually see the print. We typically use books with predictable text to make it easier for them to chime in so that they can kind of guess what's going to come next. And here the focus is on both decoding and comprehension. So we might ask them about the characters and what's happening in the story, and we still might make predictions, and we might get, focus on what the problem is or the resolution, but we're also going to focus on decoding. So we might get them to notice specific words. How do we say this word? What letter does this start with? Do you see a word that you know that you can sound out? Do you see a word that has the same letter as the letters in your name? That kind of thing. So it's both comprehension and decoding. Guided reading is done during a specific time of day when you pull a small group. It's usually 4 to 5 students, and they are ability grouped. And that's usually based on informal assessments that you've done or formal assessments. We're going to group the students by their reading ability level. Each student has their own book, and these books are specially made to use during guided reading, so they're short. They're intended in the early childhood period. They're intended to be read in one sitting. In 3rd grade, some of the higher level readers might go more than one day, but at the lower levels, the students will read the whole book during guided reading. The teacher does not read the book. The student reads the whole book, because remember, we're gradually releasing responsibility. So here the student is going to read the whole book on their own, and you're going to kind of position yourself so that you can listen in. If a child is already reading silently, you can ask them to whisper read. Kindergarten, 1st grade, even some 2nd grade students will still be whisper reading. And you're just going to listen in to see what kind of struggles they might have and to give them support as they need it. We don't have one child read to the rest of the group. We don't do popcorn reading. This is students reading independently, but with you there at the table with them. The lesson also gives them a little bit more support. You might do a little bit of a phonics lesson, guide them in what they're going to read, what they should be looking for, and then do a little comprehension work after they read. And this usually lasts 15 to 20 minutes. Now, what are the other kids doing while you're doing guided reading? They are at literacy centers. The students are going to go to literacy centers and they're going to work independently, usually with a small group, and the teacher is doing guided reading at this time. So that it's important that the literacy centers are designed so that students can do them completely independently and they don't bother you while you're over at your guided reading lesson. And then finally, there's independent reading. In different models of literacy instruction, this comes at a different time. In some classes, this will be done completely on its own, and we'll just have independent reading time, and everybody will get a book and they will read silently, or they'll lip read, or they might read with partners. Sometimes this is done during guided reading. So the students might be doing independent reading while you're working with your guided reading group. So it might be a combination even of literacy centers and independent reading. For example, one of the centers might be the independent reading center. That said, it's very important that we have independent reading every single day. We can't count on kids to read at home or to have the support that they need at home. So independent reading must happen during school every day. In kindergarten, 1st grade, I'd say, aim for 10 to 15, hopefully 20 minutes. By 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, 20 minutes per day. Even twice a day would be better. Here I want to show you some of the most popular organizational structures for a balanced literacy approach. Some of you might have heard of the Daily 5. In the Daily 5, they have what they call rounds that repeat. There's a mini lesson that the teacher does, followed by Reader's Workshop. And during the Reader's Workshop, the teacher's doing guided reading, and then the students go to centers. And one of the centers will be read to self or independent reading. The other centers are read to someone, listen to reading, work on writing, or word work. And then there's a little share or check-in at the end, like a minute or two. And then the round might repeat again. The teacher does a different mini lesson. It might be the part 2, and then they do another Reader's Workshop. And each round will last 15 to 20 minutes. So you might do 2 or 3 rounds each day with 2 or 3 mini lessons. And that's very effective because keeping kids on the carpet more than 5 to 8 minutes or so is counterproductive. They won't learn very much. In the Fountas and Pinnell system, this is called guided reading, basically. And again, they have rounds that repeat. They'll do a mini lesson with shared reading or a read aloud. And then they do reader's workshop, that is guided reading and conferencing and independent reading. They don't tend to do other centers now. If you want to do centers, that might happen at another time. And then there's a share or check-in. So you can see those are quite similar. And then you might have heard of Lucy Calkins' reader's workshop. That starts with a mini lesson, and then the reader's workshop part is independent reading and then conferencing with individuals or groups. In the Lucy Calkins model, instead of guided reading, she conferences with students, so she sits down right next to them and listens to them read, or she might pull a few kids in a group, but there are not regular groups that meet on a regular basis. So those are some of the differences between the different structures that your school might use. Let's look at this a little in more depth. You'll notice that all of those models had a mini lesson that's usually with a mentor text or an anchor text. Sometimes it's called an anchor text, sometimes it's called a mentor text. That can be done in both reading and writing. In a writer's workshop, the text is used to demonstrate some type of writing process. And then, so we'll model that with the text, and then we'll go right into writer's workshop where the children are writing independently, and then you are stopping by to conference with them to see how they're doing. You're taking notes, you're evaluating, assessing, and again, there'll be a little bit of share time. So you can see this is the same structure as the reader's workshop. The components of a mini lesson, they usually start with some connection to what we've done before. Then there's a teaching point where you directly model something. You're directly teaching them what to do. And then you want to have some kind of an active engagement in that mini lesson. So if we're teaching them, maybe how to use the first letter of a word to guess what that word is, we might put up a poster and have them try that for a minute. Again, this is only going to be 5 to 8 minutes, so it's quick. You're only teaching one small thing. And then the link is the link to what they're going to be doing during their independent time. So if it's a reading lesson, so during reading today, when you're reading, I want you to remember to use the first letter of the word to see if you can guess what the word is. Or, while you're reading today, I want you to pay attention to who is the main character and write in your reader's workshop, reader's journal, who's the main character. So you're going to link the mini lesson to what they're doing independently. Or in writing, it might be, so remember today, when you write your topic sentence, you're going to try to make it look like the topic sentence that we just created, something like that. Guided reading, let's go over that a little bit. Again, to reiterate, it's small group, it's differentiated instruction because each group is at a different level. And we use leveled texts. So as I mentioned before, there are special books that you use for guided reading that are based on the student's reading level, and it's 15 to 20 minutes long. The first step is we introduce the text. We might identify unusual vocabulary or provide background knowledge and maybe preview the book depending upon their reading level and provide a comprehension focus for reading. So as I mentioned before, today when you read, I want you to pay attention to what's the problem in the story maybe, or pay attention to any metaphors or similes that you read in the story. Or today you're going to look for text features while you read. So you give them a focus while they're reading. And then you might model how to do that. So your teaching point might be to, once again, model for them what they're going to do. And then you send them off to read their book independently. So they're sitting at the table in front of you. Each student reads the text individually. You listen in on them reading one at a time, and you prompt the students as needed. So you're going to teach, prompt, and reinforce the strategies, the strategic actions that we want to teach them to use. So in other words, this is their practice time. We've taught them these strategies. It's not enough to just teach the strategies. The kids have to practice it, right? So if this were a sport, this is the practice time. And then at the very end, we're going to discuss the text and review the comprehension focus. Who was the main character, or what metaphors did you see, and develop the student's understanding of that text. We might, depending upon the time we have them also do some kind of writing or drawing about what they read, but this depends on how much time you have. And then the last step is to reflect on that and plan your next lesson. So usually during guided reading, teachers are taking some notes on what the students are struggling with or what they're doing well. Maybe they need to be moved up to a different group or moved down to a lower group. So we're taking notes so that we know what to teach in the next lesson. So those are the instructional contexts for reading and the gradual release of responsibility model. We use read aloud, shared reading, guided reading, literacy centers, and independent reading to get students to learn new concepts, to learn new strategies, to try them out on their own with support, and then to try them out independently.